Hey, I'm James from Autonomy Network, and today I'm going to be talking about decentralized automation and bringing centralized exchange features to DEXs. So some very brief background about me. I've implemented proof of stake in Dapper Labs' Flow blockchain, done a bunch of bot stuff, built a cross-chain DEX, done tracking and de-anonymization for clients like the FBI, etc. And why are people still using centralized exchanges? I mean, if you look at the kind of growth of DeFi and particularly DEXs over the last couple of years, especially since DeFi summer 2020, you would think that we're starting to eclipse centralized exchanges, but I mean, they've also been growing, and still today they're overshadowing DEXs with currently at least 10x the amount of volume compared to all DEXs in aggregate on any given day. And so, of course, there's a few reasons for this, but the kind of immediately obvious ones are that building on a blockchain has trade-offs. Latency, obviously the cost, and so centralized exchanges that don't have to deal with these things are able to offer things like a better UX with kind of immediate executions, risk management, because they have a centralized way of automating things for stop losses, etc. And so these things lead to more liquidity, more trading volume, which leads to more liquidity, and which leads to more trading volume, etc. in this kind of reinforcing loop. And so Sunny and the team have been pretty public that what they're really competing with are centralized exchanges. And so when you look at CEXs and the kind of core components that make up the overall suite of products for not just trading, but limit orders, stop losses, margin trading, etc. It really needs these four components. So swapping, obviously Osmosis already has it, and swapping in general has been fairly standardized with the model over the last few years. You have lending markets, which again have been fairly standardized over the last few years, and Osmosis is currently building that, which is needed for things like margin trading, etc. But the two things that are really missing are an automation layer and a fiat on-ramp. And the more automation layer for things like limit orders and stop losses, doing things in the future based on certain conditions on a blockchain. A fiat on-ramp, I'm definitely not an expert on that, so I'm going to be focusing on the automation side of things. So what's missing is on-chain automation in order to get the same kind of feature parity of centralized exchanges. Historically, people have typically approached this in a centralized way. Some team has some product and they want to automate something, and so they write custom bots for this, and it's just hard-coded to this use case. Aside from the centralization and whether users actually care about that or not, the thing is it takes a long time to develop these bots, this infrastructure. Certainly at least a few months. SushiSwap was building limit orders for their DEX for over 6 months and paused them on Polygon after a while because they were having issues. It's not easy to build this stuff, and it takes a long time. And people are just essentially reinventing the wheel over and over again. And the thing is, though, they're also not composable, and so even if people could kind of build on top of each other, these systems are typically hard coded to a single use case. So in the case of SushiSwap's limit orders or 1inch's limit orders, they are just they can only be used for that use case on that DEX. They can't be used for stop losses. They can't be used for limit orders on other DEXs, etc. And so when teams are creating these use cases for their own products, they're just reinventing the wheel and just creating all the same infrastructure over and over again. And so what we need is a generalized way of kind of an automation protocol that builds out all this infrastructure that anyone can use, so that when you want to implement some of these features, you don't need to build all this from scratch. So Autonomy Network is a decentralized automation protocol. It can be used for the implementation of new features in and outside of DeFi. It can be used for any action under any condition. I mean, it's not just in DeFi. I mean, we have a game that we're gonna launch soon called Meta Dungeon that has NFTs that transfer themselves and non-playable characters like NPCs. And even just simple things like recurring payments in crypto. It's kind of embarrassing actually that crypto has existed for over a decade and we don't have simple things like recurring like subscription payments or like salary payments that just pay out automatically every 2 weeks or a month or whatever. So it can be used to automate anything, like I mentioned, any action under any condition. It's fully composable, so a use case that someone is building out can be built on top of by someone else, which is like the superpower of blockchains. It's off the shelf, especially for like common use cases like limit orders and stop losses. We have like SDKs so that UIs or like DEXs can just simply really quickly add limit orders and stop losses to their DEX. So it works in 3 basic steps. Like a user makes a request, like a limit order, trade X for Y at Z price. The condition becomes true at some point in the future. Price goes past Z on the open market, and a bot from a decentralized network of bots executes this request in exchange for a fee. It's comparable to the fee charged on a centralized exchange for a trade. So a very quick demo just to kind of showcase it. This is one of the earliest integrations of a DEX we had. This DEX called Circus. So as you see, it's like a very familiar swapping UI, like Uniswap style. So you have the input and output token with an extra price field. And so we're just looking at like getting the current price and requiring that the amount outputted by this limit order is slightly above the market price, just so that it takes very little market movement for the purpose of the example to move it. So the user makes one single transaction, and the limit order shows up in the open orders tab. We then pump the price to make it up to the limit price, and the order has executed and shows up in the executed tab. So it's super simple, pretty much the same UX as a centralized exchange, just with an extra transaction. And so essentially this kind of this risk management is already live on autoswap.trade. It's kind of UI for showcasing or for demoing like limits and stops on like the major EVM chains on the major DEXs there. We also recently launched on Solana, adding limits and stops to the major DEXs Orca and Radium. And yeah, super excited to announce that we're building on CosmWasm and gonna launch Osmosis on Autoswap pretty soon. So you'll be able to do limit orders and stop losses via like routed through the Osmosis DEX. And that should be live soon, TM. So a couple other things that we will be working on soon after like limits and stops are live for Osmosis are automatic self-liquidations. Osmosis is building a lending platform, and so one of the things that we have been building, autosafe.io, is essentially an MVP for liquidating your own position. Like if you're borrowing some assets, and if you were going to get near, like very close to the collateral ratio, and you think, okay, I'm going to get liquidated, and you pay like a 12% fee if you do get liquidated, you would probably just liquidate yourself. But obviously you can't be online all the time, and so you need an automated way of doing that, of liquidating yourself. And so that's what Autosafe is. It uses Cashi, like SushiSwap, as the lending platform. But we definitely plan to add more lending platforms in the future, such as Osmosis. So you'll be able to borrow with essentially like way less risk, because you're, I would never say guaranteed, but you're far less likely to actually get liquidated, because you just liquidate yourself automatically. And something that's kind of very topical at the moment, especially given the UST collapse recently, is essentially a new stablecoin. So we'll be releasing something next week, which super excited about. It'd probably be our biggest product yet, in my opinion. So I can't say too much about it yet. But the relevant part is that we can essentially take an LP token that's used on DEXs in general and turn it into a yield-bearing stablecoin. And so since each one is kind of specific to a pair, a pair on an AMM. So, there are many LP tokens, obviously specific to each pair. And so there would be many of these kind of yield-bearing stablecoins that we can create. We can kind of use all of those yield-bearing stablecoin equivalent things as collateral for a new stablecoin. We're essentially able to create a stablecoin based on the Osmosis DEX itself, which is pretty super cool because it's kind of based on this composable nature, and it's not based on inflation of a token. And so the yield bearing part comes from obviously there are fees generated from a positive externality, so to speak, trading fees. Doesn't just come from inflation. And so it's essentially allows Cosmos to have an actually properly collateralized stablecoin. It's not an algorithmic stablecoin, but it's not an over collateralized stablecoin. I guess more info on that to come soon. And that's about it. So people soon, once we launch Osmosis on Autoswap, will be able to sleep tight, knowing they're not going to get absolutely wrecked, because they could put a stop loss, etc. And if the people want to find out more, our links are on our site, autonomynetwork.io. And we're actually doing a new investment round, which is great timing, obviously, but in the market. But if you're interested in that as an investor, shoot me an email at james@autonomynetwork.io. And cheers.